here's the template that I'm going to be using to make my sprinkles hoop today. I'm going to be using this lovely pink fabric. This is an 18 by 18 centimetre piece. I'm going to be stitching it in a 4-inch, which is 10 centimetre hoop. You can see that that fits on there as well. The circle on the diagram I think is 12 centimetres, which is 5-inch. This is a 6-inch, so you can basically see that it fits lots of different hoops depending on what you've got. I'm also using an air erasable marker. Mine's got washi tape on, so I know it's mine. You'll find these in my shop, along with the fabric and the hoops. Okay, so the great thing about this fabric is that you can quite easily see the template through it. Okay, so I'm simply going to place it on top, check the positioning with my hoop. You could do the same if you want. And then basically just take the pen and I'm going to trace over the design really carefully. Now the great thing about these pens is they're so easy to use and the ink really does disappear. If you've never used one before, it might seem like a bit of magic, and it kind of is, I guess. It really does disappear. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, sometimes it takes a few hours, a couple of days, it just depends. But basically you're using it like a normal pen, just trace over the design and you can see that looks great there. So pop the lid back on, move the template to one side now and get this set up. Okay, so there's a separate video about setting up your hoop. If you haven't seen it, just go and find it on YouTube. Basically put the ring under there and then we're going to place the smaller ring on top. It's worth spending a bit of time making sure that the design's in the middle. Sometimes I do iron it before the end, but I'm not planning to here, so I just want to make sure it's in the right place. Just going to tighten the top there. Now, making sure that the tension of the fabric is right. You don't want to pull it too tightly so that you're warping the weave of the fabric, but it needs to be tight enough so that it looks flat in the hoop. There we go. Ready to go. So I have a giant cone of this. This is 3804, which is a DMC colour, and I'm just going to cut a little bit off there. Okay, now it's up to you. This is 6 strands of thread. I always like to stitch with 3. That's just what I comfortably stitch with most of the time. So you can see that I'm just going to split the strands there into 2 groups of 3. If you're used to using 2, if you're a cross stitcher who's giving this a go for a first time, you can do that. As I said, the ink will disappear really easily, so it doesn't matter if you don't cover it all with the 2 strands, it will disappear. Here's a thread magic again, which I showed you in the previous setup video. Okay, this is a really great product and I basically don't stitch without it. I love it so much. It's a bit of an investment, but it's totally worth it. So just run the thread through it and then I'm going to run it through my fingers to get any of the excess off there. And now take my needle. Let's see if I can thread this. Here we go. Ooh, try again. This bit can be a bit fiddly, just be patient. It's just practice. There we go. You can use a needle threader if that helps. So let's tie a knot in the end. I'm going to double knot it, get it exactly over the top. If you don't knot, if you've learned to use the method where you don't knot, that's absolutely fine. I do. I just prefer it. It feels more secure to me. Trim the excess and we're ready to go. Please just use whatever methods you've used in the past if you've already learnt in a certain way. So, following the lines of the lettering as if you're writing it, we're going to stitch these letters here and we're going to use a small back stitch. Okay, so if you're not sure, you could always go back and look at the other video and have a little practice on your practice hoop. Having a practice hoop is a great idea if you've not done a stitch for a while, to just have a little go before you do it on your main project, or if you want to just go for it, then that's fine. You basically start with 1 stitch and then come up through the fabric a little way on, as you've seen me do just there, and and stitch that back stitch, go right back through that hole where the previous stitch started. So you're basically ending up with a line of stitches that join together. The back stitch is really great for this because essentially with a handwritten text like this, something that you would have written with a fine pen or a pencil, the back stitch covers it really, really nicely. So keep checking your tension of your fabric, checking it's not bunching up. Sometimes just your hands as you're holding the hoop can move it a little bit. Just take your time, keep checking it, and keep stitching, following that line. There we go. So if you've watched the first 2 tutorial videos, you'll know that with the back stitch, just keeping them nice and small is really great. We're coming to the top of this letter H, the first letter here, and it's got quite a tight curve, but because we're using fairly small back stitches here, it'll just move around that curve really, really nicely. So right back in to where that previous stitch started. Here we go, let's just move around this curve with another little stitch. There we are. If you're new to hand embroidery and you're stitching along, I hope you're enjoying just slowing down and focusing on these stitches. I love seeing the design build up. And it's not a quick craft. It's not designed to be something quick. And that's okay. The process is really, really important. And as I said in my introductory video, it's something that has been really, really important to me over the last few years. Just allowing myself that creative time. So I hope that you're going to enjoy it too. Don't worry about how fast or how slow you're going. And if you've got to this point and there's a knock at the door, or your phone rings, or kids are nagging you for another snack, or whatever it is, the great thing about it is that you can just drop it. You can drop it mid-stitch. And if you don't get to come back to it for a few hours or a few days, whatever, it's still there. It's still going to be there where you left off, waiting for you to pick it up again. And I don't mean that in a kind of it being in the back of your mind, kind of you haven't finished the project kind of way. I mean that in a nice way. And it's going to be there for when you have the time to be able to come back to it and enjoy it. And even if you only get a few stitches done, certainly with a project like this where it's the lettering, you only take a few stitches to be able to see some more progress. I mean, how long have we been stitching here? The video is on 8:50 something. 8 minutes. It's 8 minutes of real-time stitching. I'm just going to go back into the whole gap where that stitch finished to carry on. So we've got 8 minutes of real-time stitching, and I've almost got one letter, and that might put some people off, I guess, it being such a slow craft. But for me, that's one of the things I love about it. I can see it building up. Okay, so we're nearly at the end of the H, and it's coming together nicely. If at any point you do a stitch and you think, I can see a gap there, I'm not sure about that, don't be afraid to unpick it and go back. That's really, really easy to do. It's worth it to get that continuous line. Just a couple more stitches. go. There's our H. It's looking nice on the back. Okay, no need to tie off here, we'll just keep going. Now I got all the way along here on the end of my thread and I'm getting a bit short now, so I probably should tie off at the back. Try not to leave yourself with hardly anything to tie because otherwise that's really difficult. So I'm just going to use my needle to make a loop and pull it through. There is a clearer video of this. If you look at the stitch videos I'll show you with a bit more thread where you can see it a bit more clearly, but basically tie a double knot and you're trying to get it as close to the fabric as possible. Don't pull it too tightly because you don't want to stretch it, and trim off any excess thread so it doesn't poke through. There we are, looking good from the front still too. We can just rethread and we're going to carry on stitching. So thread your needle in exactly the same way again. Now it doesn't really look like it here, but the design has faded a little bit, so I'm just going to draw it on again, just with the pen. They're so easy to use, simple as that. It starts to fade, draw it on, and then you can just carry on stitching again, and what I've just drawn will continue to fade as well. So let's keep going with our stitching. Right, so I've got to the end now of the word hope, and you can see that it's nice and neat on the back, but please don't worry if yours doesn't look neat. It doesn't matter, no one's going to see the back. We don't really need to worry about it. I'm tying off right at the end here. Sometimes you need to tie off between each individual letter just so that you can't see it through the front, but I'm not doing that here just because it's a continuous line. So there we are. We're ready to add some sprinkles now. And so I've chosen some colours from my loose ends jar, and again using some thread magic I've threaded my needle, this time using 6 strands. Okay, tie off the end in exactly the same way, but the 6 strands is going to give us a bit of a different look as I stitch some sprinkles around the edge using some straight stitches. Okay, so I'm doing this by eye. You can draw them on if you prefer, do whatever works for you. I'm just going to make a little straight stitch here with this lovely green thread. And that's it. That's basically a sprinkle. That's how easy it is. Now, sometimes, depending on the fabric that you're using, you can come up again without tying off. But as you can see on this fabric, you can see it through, and I just don't really want that look. I want it to look nice and clean. So I think what I'm going to do is take my needle off. I'm going to pull it out gently, really, really carefully because we don't want to pull it. Okay, and then I'm just going to tie a knot. Double knot, oops, try not to get the fabric caught. Double knot, close to the fabric. You could do just one, I guess, if you wanted here because we've got the 6 strands, but I still prefer to do 2 personally. Remember, don't pull it too tightly because you don't want to pull the stitch up front. Trim off the excess. There, as you can see, that looks much cleaner. So you might think it is a bit faffy, but you can't see this the thread coming through the back, and I prefer that personally for this particular project. So I just need to rethread my needle. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, there we go. Marvellous. 6 strands is a little bit more fiddly, so if you're new to threading needles, you might want to use a needle threader. I do find them a bit faffy and I just break them. Do whatever works for you. Okay, trim the ends, and then we're basically going to stitch another one. So you can see where I went to start the other one has a little hole, so I'm just going to try and cover that up. Come back through the same place. There we are, pull it through, and I'm going to stitch a sprinkle the same size. Again, I'm just doing this by eye, but please feel free to use the air erasable pen or just a really light pencil. Really, really light if you're going to use pencil, because remember you want it to be covered up completely by the stitching, but find something that you feel comfortable with. Trim it at the back, and we now have 2 sprinkles. So what I did was I stitched 3 sprinkles in each colour and tied off at the back each time. It looks quite pretty at the back. And there's a few gaps, I think, so I'm probably going to fill them in with 1 more of each. You can put as many in as you like. So I'll add those, and here we are. You'll also notice that I've added a trademark colourful hoop. So let's finish the back. So I've positioned it in my hoop, and I'm just going to trim the excess fabric. I do this by eye. You're basically leaving a little bit around the edge because we're going to sew it up at the back and it's all going to gather. So you don't want to leave too much fabric because otherwise it's too bulky if you're going to hang it on the wall. But you don't want to leave too little that it doesn't gather. So I think here I've left a couple of centimetres or so. Just trim it round by eye. So you basically end up with that round fabric all the way around the hoop, and we're ready to just finish the back. So I'm using some pearl thread, which is the same thickness as 3 strands, but the way they make it is they spin it really fast, so it's 1 thread and it won't split. So just put a loop around the hoop to make sure that it's big enough, cut a small piece, and then thread it onto your needle. There we go. Right, so in a similar way to before, I'm going to tie knots at the end. This time we actually need to leave the excess attached, so it's quite a good idea to leave a fair amount, not too much, maybe a couple of centimetres, 3 centimetres or so, an inch, whichever measurements you prefer, and just leave that there. So we're not going to trim it, because we actually need to use that bit in a little while. So put the needle through the fabric right at the top, near where the screw is, and just make a largish stitch and pull it through. So you can see the knot has stopped through the fabric, that end is dangling, and I've got that 1 stitch. Basically, we need to do that again. Do it all the way around the hoop, and as you do that you'll see that it's starting to gather. Even with just those 2 stitches, it's starting to gather at the back. So I'm just going to continue to do that all the way around, and you can see already that it's gathering even more just after those first few stitches. So the pearl thread is really good to use for this because it's thicker than using 1 strand of standard thread. You want something with a bit of strength because we are going to pull it and tie it up to bring it all together at the back. You could use 3 strands of separate floss if you want, if you don't want the pearl. It might just be a little bit more tricky to do then because obviously the strands are separated and they can come apart a little bit. The beauty of this pearl is that it is that 1 strand that won't come apart, but it is the same thickness as the 3. Don't worry if your stitches are slightly different lengths, it really doesn't matter, it's just the back. Keep going, just mind that end out of the way. Keep going all the way to the top. There we go. Now the last one, come out fairly close, basically next to where your first stitch started. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just pull that end so those gathers come together nicely. And I'm going to tie a knot and pull it again. There we go. It's a bit fiddly this. Okay, I've left my needle on, but you don't have to. I find it easier actually just to help get it through that small space. Pull it tightly and tie again. We'll do it once more for luck, just to make it really secure. There we go. Let's just trim that there, make it all nice and neat and tidy. Put those things to one side. Ta-da! There's the back, all nice and neat, and there's the front. Let's take that extra bit off there. And there you have it.